As a child, I was able to hear the stories from both my grandfather, who served in World War II, and my father, who was drafted and served in Vietnam. These tales immediately started to make these links and connections with war images that I was seeing on television, in history books, in comic books. What I always sort of deemed to be a very easy subject, it sort of got a lot more complicated, and I saw the other side of that and what the consequences were and what the price was for this idea of being an American hero. Men at war, street thugs, eventually boxers, they were all sort of the same symbol for me. They were all sort of trying to fight their way out for survival. Many of these portraits are rapidly fading away in my own time. And for me, I feel that I have every opportunity to defy that. I met John when we were both in the 5th grade, I believe. We were pretty inseparable, always hanging out, always playing ball together. Even though we went our own separate directions, we always stayed in touch, and John was one of those rare friends you can not communicate with for 4 years, and when you run into each other again, it's like you're still 12 years old. I remember him calling me to tell me he enlisted in the Army. He was pretty confident that they weren't going to send him into combat, but before he knew it, he was embarking on his first tour of duty in Iraq as a combat medic. When I first asked John about doing a portrait of him, I was working on a series that consisted of several war images. This idea of a warfare throughout the ages, you know, generation after generation. John was the only individual, the only friend that I had that was actually experiencing combat and had just completed his first tour. I expressed my idea of making a portrait of him, and he was all for it. He was very supportive and was actually quite excited about it. I took this side from a war movie, and then I took this side from an old war photograph. So for me, it's this sort of layering of history, you know, that's actual history, and then again, that sort of invented history. So in the end, they become these actual moments, this collage of actual moments and histories that are making up and sort of reinventing this new history. It's almost like my personal journal, you know, but instead of writing, I did it all through images. I hadn't noticed anything different about him until we were finishing up the photo shoot and we were walking back to his mom's house in the neighborhood. And I asked him about his experience as a combat medic in Iraq, and immediately, I mean, instantly, I saw this veil just kind of drape over his face. It was almost as if I had been creating this work all of these years to arrive at this one point where these fictional portraits that I was creating were about John without me even realizing it, because he was now the real deal come to life. I remember taking this photograph of John in front of his mother's house, and with neither one of us anticipating what was about to come. I mean, at this point, he only has about 2 months left. So I flew home for his burial and to see his family and to help to carry his casket at Fort Sam, where he's now buried. You know, it was a very surreal and strange visual. You know, it seemed like something from some past Civil War era because of this long-standing tradition, you know, these military funerals. And at this point, they pick up the casket and march in. So we do this high step of marching.
After the third volley, the squad leader will give the command to present arms, which is a rifle salute. At that time, we once again render a hand salute as we prepare to listen to the sounds of taps.
You know, nobody was even aware that I was recording on my phone underneath my coat during the ceremony. It later on served as the inspiration for the concepts of Excerpts for John. I was constantly listening to this sound clip over and over, and so it really helped me to compose the images. And then this one last eerie ghost train, you know, really finalizes the entire sort of setting of this sound. To me, that was John, sort of saying goodbye. As the viewer, you're confronted with this portrait whose eyes are sort of emblazoned by some image that you'll never know who he's staring at, what he's seen, what he's experienced. But this short film will sort of help to give a hint of maybe the visions that are passing right before his very eyes, or maybe the visions that he's seeing in his own future. At times it is difficult in here, just remembering him and remembering, you know, these sort of images and this history that we had together. I knew I wouldn't be happy with it until it felt like John. And it wasn't until probably the final 2 months of the painting where I looked at it and finally realized that was John. That's who he was, that's who his family would recognize. It just felt like John. I had finally made my peace with that painting. I think ultimately for me, the portrait of John becomes my own stance against the endless number of Johns that we've produced over the generations. You know, I think that when the viewer gazes upon John's face on that canvas, they will encounter an individual who has lost his way, an individual who is in question of why he's there in the first place. He becomes this memory of those that are almost entirely erased in the fog. The name and the face of my friend will continue to not only carry on the story of endless other Johns out there, he would also carry on my own story of what I work to create and pursue as an artist.